Picture this. You are 14 years old. You are sitting in a courtroom in Geneva, Switzerland, and a lawyer is reading out loud in front of reporters, cameras, and strangers from around the world the details of how your father died, what he was wearing, what was done to him, the last words he ever said, every humiliating detail. Mathilde Stern was 24 when she sat in that courtroom. Her brother Louis was 22. Their father had been one of the most powerful bankers in Europe, a man with $600 million, armed guards, a police station in his own building, a black belt in karate, and enough connections to call the president of France on a Tuesday afternoon. And somebody walked into his apartment while he was completely helpless and shot him 4 times. The French media covered it like entertainment. The Swiss courts moved at their own pace, and Edouard Stern's 3 children, Mathilde, Louis, and Henri, packed up their lives and moved to New York, away from the headlines, away from the whispers, away from the city that would forever associate their father's name with a latex suit and a pool of blood on a Geneva bedroom floor. They have never spoken publicly about what happened, not once. This is their father's story, and I promise you, what you think you know about it is not the whole truth. To understand why this case matters, and why it was handled the way it was, you have to understand who Edouard Stern actually was. Not the tabloid version, the real version. The Stern family wasn't just wealthy. They were one of the oldest banking dynasties in European history. Going back to the 1800s, Frankfurt, Germany, a Jewish banking family that built institutions that still exist today. BNP Paribas in France, Deutsche Bank in Germany, Banamex in Mexico. The Sterns weren't just in banking, they were banking. Edouard was born in 1954 in Paris. His father, Antoine, ran the family's private investment house, Bank Stern. From the time he was a teenager, there was exactly one path laid out for him. He went to ESSEC, one of the most prestigious business schools in France. And at 22 years old, before most people his age had figured out what they wanted to do with their lives, Edouard joined his father's bank. 2 years later, he forced his own father out of the company, with the help of 2 uncles. Let that land. 24 years old, just entered the working world. First move, remove his own father from the institution his father built. He ran the bank until 1985, then sold it to Lebanese investors for 300 million francs. He immediately started a second bank with a similar name, poached his former clients, and sold that one in 1988 to the Swiss Bank Corporation for an estimated 1.75 billion francs. He was in his early 30s. In 1983, he married Beatrice David Weil, daughter of Michel David Weil, the controlling shareholder of Lazard Frères, one of the most powerful investment banks in the world. 2 banking dynasties, 1 marriage. In 1992, Edouard joined Lazard, and for 5 years he was the heir apparent, until he wasn't. He clashed with his father-in-law, publicly, repeatedly. He wanted to modernize. David Weil wasn't interested. In 1997, Edouard quit. The same year, he and Beatrice separated. He started his own fund, Investment Real Returns, known as IRR. And here's what people always miss. Even after the divorce, his ex-wife Beatrice testified on his behalf at the murder trial. She said she still loved him. His ex-father-in-law, Michel David Weil, invested $300 million into Stern's new fund. Nicolas Sarkozy, who became president of France 2 years after Stern's death, was a personal friend. These are the people who went very, very quiet when the details of his death started coming out. By 2001, Edouard Stern had settled in Geneva. And when I say settled, I mean fortified. His apartment was at 17 Rue Adrien Lucanol, one of the most exclusive addresses in one of the most exclusive cities in the world. Geneva is a city where millionaires walk the streets at midnight and nobody looks twice, where violent crime is almost theoretical. And Edward Stern, who lived in this city, who was surrounded by this safety, was terrified. He had extra security alarms throughout the building, hidden cameras inside and outside covering every angle. He had a concealed button on his bedside table. One press, armed guards would be at his door in minutes, day or night. He had a concealed carry firearms permit in Europe. Do you understand how rare that is? He had connections powerful enough to get one. He owned multiple handguns. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. On the ground floor of the building where he lived was a Geneva police station. Literally below his feet, police officers all day, all night. This man was so afraid of something or someone that he turned his home into a fortress, armed, monitored, locked, with law enforcement downstairs. And he still didn't feel safe. He had received multiple death threats in the months before his death. His business dealings had made him enemies across 3 continents. He had acquired significant interests in Eastern European companies after the fall of the Soviet Union, at a time when that space was dominated by organized crime. In October 2004, a repairman came to fix a phone at Stern's New York office. Inside the phone, a bug, a wiretap, planted by someone. IRR referred the matter to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Nobody was ever charged, nobody was ever named. The Russian mafia connection was one of the first lines of investigation after his death. Geneva insiders told reporters he had a long list of powerful enemies in his personal life and his professional life, all capable of hiring the best assassins. And yet, when the end came, there were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no damaged locks, no cameras showing an intruder. Geneva's chief investigator, Michel Graber, went on Swiss television and said, "There is no doubt this is murder, and it is likely that Stern opened the door himself. He let his killer in. He trusted them enough to unlock the door of his fortress." Her name was Cécile Brossard, born 1969, a small town northwest of Paris. She was not from the world Edward Stern inhabited, not even close. Her childhood was, in her own words, a traffic jam of traumatic events. Her parents divorced when she was 3. Her mother suffered from severe depression, so severe that at one point she attempted suicide using gas. And when she did, she tried to take her 2 daughters with her. Cécile survived. She grew up, got married to a therapist in Switzerland named Xavier Gillet, became an artist, self-taught sculptor and painter. By all accounts, intelligent, creative, and emotionally volatile in a way connected to everything she had survived. In 2001, at a dinner party in Paris hosted by a mutual friend, Cécile Brossard met Edward Stern. She was 31, he was 46. Over the next 4 years, they built something that no one on the outside could fully explain. He flew her on his private jet to exotic holiday destinations, African safaris, European cities. She became completely consumed by him. Here is something nobody talks about. Cécile tattooed the letter E on her wrist, not with ink. She pressed white-hot metal against her own skin to burn it there. She said she needed him to know how deep her love was. For his part, Stern's friends said they had never seen him like this with anyone. People who saw them together described it as watching 2 people who were genuinely dangerous to each other. The highs were extraordinary, the lows were bottomless. In 2001, during their relationship, Stern began another relationship with Julia Lemigova. former Miss USSR 1990. They had a son together, named Maximilian. He died as an infant. The circumstances were never made fully public. But Julia eventually moved on. She is today known internationally as the partner of tennis legend Martina Navratilova. But in 2001, 2002, 2003, Edward Stern was maintaining multiple relationships simultaneously. And Cecile knew, and she stayed. Because leaving Edward Stern for Cecile Broussard was something she seemed genuinely incapable of doing. Even when he humiliated her, even when he controlled her, even when he dangled money and then snatched it back, she stayed until February 28, 2005. The fight that led to the killing had been building for weeks. Stern had wired $1 million into Cecile's Swiss bank account. She had asked him for it as proof that he valued her. He agreed, transferred the money. Then, on February 21st, he sent her an email. He told her she should return the money out of respect. She ignored it, turned off her phone, went to her house in rural France. On February 26th, he reversed the transfer. He had his lawyer claw the money back from her account. She found out 2 days later, called her bank, confirmed it was gone. And on February 28th, she went to Geneva. She let herself in with her own key. The cameras show no struggle, no break-in, just a woman who had the key to the fortress walking in. What happened next, according to Cecile, began as their relationship often did, an argument that shifted. Stern was in his latex suit, head to toe, flesh-colored, covering everything, tied to a chair by his own choice. This was part of their relationship. And then, while he was tied and helpless, the arguments started again. The money, the control, the humiliation. And Edward Stern, restrained in a chair, completely unable to move, looked at the woman who had burned his initial into her own skin and said, $1 million is a lot to pay for a whore. That's what she told the court. Those were the last words he ever said. She told the court, like a robot, I went to get the gun from the drawer. She fired 4 times. He took the first bullet in the head. He got up, then he fell. She said she remembered what he had taught her on their African safari. When you shoot wounded prey, you fire again at close range so it does not suffer. She moved to point-blank range, fired 3 more times. He was tied to a chair. He couldn't move. He couldn't defend himself. He couldn't even raise his hands. And then Cecile Broussard, methodically, carefully, cleaned the apartment. She gathered the shell casings. She took his collection of firearms. She locked the apartment door behind her with her own key, walked to the lake, dropped 3 guns into Lake Geneva near Montreux. Then she went to her husband's apartment, told him she and Edward had argued and she needed a few days away. Took a train to Villeneuve, a taxi to Milan, and flew to Sydney, Australia, on the other side of the world. She left Edward Stern's body in that apartment for 48 hours, until his employees couldn't reach him, until they sent the cleaning lady, until 3 people padded down that hallway and found him on the floor, still in the latex suit, in a pool of blood that had been drying for 2 days. The trial opened June 10, 2009, 4 years after the murder. 4 years during which Cecile Broussard sat in pretrial detention, during which she attempted suicide at least once, slitting her wrists while being transported between facilities, during which she was taken to psychiatric clinics 11 times, during which prison psychiatrists noted she claimed to be in direct contact with Edward's spirit. She told them his death has fused them together. The Geneva courthouse was surrounded by cameras. Stern's ex-wife, Beatrice, came to testify. She stood in that courtroom and said, I loved Edward. I continue to love him. Their daughter, Matilda, 24, sat in the gallery. Their son Louis, 22, sat beside her. Both of them listening to the details of their father's death read into the official record. Every detail. Cécile Brossard walked into court and immediately told the judge she was not there to defend herself. She said she was there to tell the truth. She spoke about Stern as though she was still in love with him. He was the most marvelous of men, she said. Intelligent, refined, extraordinary in every way. I don't want this trial to dirty my memory of him. The court-appointed psychiatrist, Jacques Gasser, gave a report that destroyed her defense. He wrote, Cécile Brossard never lost her capacity to know that her actions were wrong. Her ability to determine that was, at the most, slightly diminished. She was not delirious. Her perceptions of reality were not altered. The jury of 12 came back with murder. Not crime of passion, murder. Their statement described her behavior as cynical, deliberate, and manipulative. They noted that Stern had been tied up and completely unable to defend himself. They called the crime particularly cowardly. But they also acknowledged, and this is the part the prosecution didn't want, that Stern's behavior towards Cécile had been humiliating, harassing, and occasionally cruel. Sentence: 8 years and 6 months. The maximum was 20 years. She had already served 4 years in pretrial detention. With time served and parole at 2/3, the woman who shot one of Europe's most powerful bankers 4 times while he was tied to a chair walked out of prison on November 10, 2010, 5 years and a few months after the murder. And she was banned from entering Switzerland for 10 more years. Here is what every documentary, every magazine piece, every YouTube video about this case spent almost no time on. Edward Stern had a child who died. A son named Maximilian, born in 2001 during his relationship with Julia Lemigova. The baby died as an infant. The circumstances were never made fully public. In 2023, Julia Lemigova appeared on The Real Housewives of Miami. In a 2024 episode, she spoke about grief, about loss, about Stern's influence on her life. She referenced trauma, but the full truth of what happened to Maximilian Stern has never been told publicly. A baby, gone, 6 years before his father was murdered, and nobody connected those two tragedies in any serious reporting. The second thing nobody talked about, Stern's investment fund, RRR, had $300 million of Michel David Weil's money in it. When Stern died, RRR was wound down. The liquidation of his portfolio, companies in Russia, Eastern Europe, the UK, France, happened quietly over several years with almost zero press coverage. $600 million in assets. No journalist tracked where that money went. No outlet asked the obvious question, who benefited financially from Edward Stern's death beyond the woman who served 5 years in prison for it? Nobody in power ever had to answer that. Cécile Brossard has been free since November 2010. She is 56 years old today. In 2023, she finally broke her silence. She gave her first public interview since the trial to French radio RTL. On the program, she said, "I have obviously kept absolute silence because I wanted to protect the grief of Edward Stern's children." She said, "Edward was a father who listened to them, who helped them discover art. My act deprived them of their father. I think about everything he could have given them. It is a wound that nothing will heal." On the murder itself, she said, "At no moment, not for 1 second, did I think I was going to kill him. It happened like a lightning bolt. He burned my neurons and exploded my heart. I was no longer the pilot of what I was doing." She said she still thinks about him. After 15 years of freedom, that is what she chose to say publicly. Beatrice David Weil, Stern's ex-wife, moved to New York with her children after his death. She works at Sotheby's, the auction house, surrounded by art and money as she always was. People who know her say she is quiet, self-contained. She testified that she still loved him. She has never spoken publicly about his death beyond that courtroom. Their 3 children, Mathilde, Louis, and Henri, inherited approximately 600 million euros. They have maintained complete silence. No interviews, no statements, no public presence. They were teenagers and young adults when their father was killed in the most humiliating circumstances imaginable, and the world treated it like a tabloid story. They have chosen to give the world nothing in return. Here is the question that has never been seriously asked in 20 years of coverage. Edward Stern was terrified. Armed, fortified, surveilled, police station in his own building, a button on his bedside table connected to armed guards. He was afraid of something specific. And yet, when the end came, he was completely vulnerable. By choice. He had let Cecile in. He had trusted her with the key. He had placed himself in a position where he literally could not defend himself. The man who feared the Russian mafia, the man who feared whatever enemy had driven him to turn his home into a fortress, that man chose, willingly, to be completely helpless in front of another person. Why? What was he running from? And did whatever he feared follow him anyway? Or did it die with him in that apartment while his children slept in New York 3,000 miles away, not yet knowing that their father was already gone? The official version says, crime of passion, jealousy, money, a volatile woman and a cruel man. But the questions that never got answered, the wiretap in New York, the address book police never discussed, the $300 million nobody tracked, the infant who died 6 years before the murder. Those questions are still sitting there, open, unanswered, 20 years later. I want to know what you think. Cecile Brassard is 56 years old. She's been free for 15 years. She's living a normal life somewhere in France. Does that feel like justice to you? And here is the question nobody has asked. If Stern was being watched, if his phone was bugged, if powerful people wanted him gone, would it have been so hard to put the right woman in the right place at the right time? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one. That's Global Mysteries Untold. Everything from different angles. Every Thursday, a story the world buried. Subscribe, and I'll see you next week.